I'd like to start, the other thing, one of the hugest parts of my life right now is I do bereavement support groups, which is very much about getting everybody to participate. So I'm going to ask you to participate in a very simple way, which is to close your eyes for a minute. Kind of can feel uncomfortable, but if you don't mind just closing your eyes and just imagine complete and total darkness. Sometimes you've been in the dark because of a storm and the power's gone out. Maybe you've been out in the middle of the ocean or in the wilderness and you've experienced darkness. Or maybe you've just imagined when you close your eyes like you're floating in the universe. But in this particular darkness that I'm asking you to imagine, I want you to feel like there's nobody to turn to. Nobody's coming to help. You can't look forward to any hour of the day during which this darkness will end. It's all around you, and you begin to get the sense of the infinite nature of this darkness. How does it feel? And I want to remind you that when Jesus said in John 8:12, he was speaking to people in this kind of darkness. There were many forms of it, as there are many forms now. And most of you probably could identify some darkness you're encountering or feeling like you want to challenge. And Jesus spoke right into it and said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So I invite you to connect for a second to that light that's inside of you. And remember that regardless of what size darkness you encounter through illness or death or trial or witnessing the trauma of others, that you also have this light inside you to help you disperse it. And I want to invite you to open your eyes now. So in this passage from John, John and the other gospel writers, part of what they're doing is exploring who Jesus is, which is something that we are challenged to do, and you probably do in casual ways, maybe in conversation and things like that. But I want to talk a second I want to talk to you a second about why Jesus was so extraordinary. And at the time, just like today, how there are many different denominations of Christians, there were kind of like different denominations of Jews at the time, okay? So Jewishness is an ethnicity as well as a religion, right? Okay, so it was possible, if it was possible to be a person who identifies with the ethnic side of being a Jewish person, which in the Jewish worldview, to be Jewish was to be anointed as the special people, right? God's people. That's right. So it was possible to identify with the ethnic dimension of Jewishness without being a religious Jew. People at our synagogue down the street have been identified as kind of being that way. Many of them would say, that's how I am. I'm not very religious, you know. And we're not judging that. Just to point out that this is one strain of the experience as a Jewish person. So there were the Sadducees, who were ethnic Jews, who were the class of aristocrats, priests, and nobles. And they didn't particularly concern themselves so much with the religious part of their practice, but they had this special status, and they had wealth and education. And as with most people with wealth and status, they want to preserve it. So they had an interest in collaborating with the Roman government to jibe with the world's ways, right? So there were also the Pharisees, and you all know Pharisees are often the ones we see grilling Jesus on why he's doing, why he's believing, why he's saying what he's saying. And we kind of feel like they're cruel. But if you understand who the Pharisees were, and So there's intention and there's impact. The impact of what he was doing to Jesus was pretty cruel, right? They were always trying to undermine him and diminish him like he was not a good or authentic person of God. So, but where they're coming from is they subscribed to a form of Judaism that was all about following the law, the commandments given down to Moses. And they say, Moses is our father. We follow him. And therefore, we must abide by these rules. And anybody who's not doing that is not in accord with God and God's will. So if you believe that the only way to God is through keeping these rules, and yet we're not capable of keeping those rules, you have a problem in society, right? There's going to be nothing but oppression and punishment. And who's policing that? The sinners themselves, though they claim to be righteous, right? It's really a jumbled up mess. But you can see why somebody would be a Pharisee, right? Because we want to know how to do it right. We want to be good and we want to do it right. So you can understand why, yes, we want the rules and we just give me the instructions and I will do it, right? We want clarity. And that's that's what compels that way of being. It's understandable. And if we took, it would be interesting because we have Christian congregations who are like that, right?
Stand up here, sit down there.
Well, but even within the Catholic Church, which is the tradition I was formed in, even within the Catholic Church, there are charismatics, there are post-Vatican II Catholics, and there are Orthodox Catholics. So you see this kind of pattern replicating in all these different environments, which is kind of interesting. Catholics get the rap like that because the liturgy is highly structured. But even within the liturgy, people are bringing their own stories to it. Anyway, that's we could sit and have, coffee. But, okay, so we got the Sadducees, we got the Pharisees, and then we have the Zealots, which were, those of you who have kind of a warrior spirit, you might have really liked the Zealots because they were the ones, the Black Panthers, the NRA in Ireland, people who they believe what they believe and they're going to fight for it, and you're not going to take over my territory, and I'm going to keep the space open for us to, there's a warrior spirit in it. And just for your information, it was, so Zealots are not shy about revolution. But from a status quo perspective, if you're about revolution, then you're a terrorist. Because you're going to wreck my power, my money, my order, and I don't want you anywhere near me, right? Do you know there are a lot of animal rights activists who have deep compassion for animals, who are doing things to liberate animals, and they're being persecuted as terrorists. They're being jailed as terrorists in our country today, just FYI. So we still live with this dynamic, too, of people who, you think about the civil rights movement, right? Those people were treated as if they were all criminals. And in fact, they were moving out of a spirit of God that humans are worthy regardless of skin color, etc., right? So Jesus was actually crucified as a zealot. They identified him as a zealot, though he wasn't a zealot. But you can see how from the status quo, Jesus was not about fighting in war. He was about peace and love, right? But ironically, when you live in a system of oppression, all worldly structures are structures of oppression, period. So if you are counter to that, you're going to be regarded as an anarchist or revolutionary in some way. And you might have experienced this in small ways in your job, for example. Did you ever stand up for the right thing at your job, but you were scared to because you didn't want to lose your job? Sometimes when you act out of your conviction of the good, it goes against the status quo of the structure, and you're put in this category of disruptor, crazy disruptor, insane, crazy disruptor, right? So though Jesus wasn't violent, he was put in that category with the Zealots, and it makes sense from that point of view, right? Okay, so the fourth option at the time was to be an Essene. So the Essene were all about relationship with God. You guys know them?
I do.
What do you know about them?
They were kind of a sect that went off to themselves because they felt like they were getting it all wrong. And they were very strict with, it was about love, and it was about not having that hierarchical system so much as being, they considered themselves to be the followers of like the light and the way.
The way, right.
The
Spirit of God. So think about religious communities, for example, or even like intentional communities where you're like so frustrated that you can't freaking keep chickens in your backyard in town. You're going to move out somewhere far, and you're going to get together with a lot of people who want to grow food and want to live communally. And but as an example, there is this impulse in human nature. If I can't fit into the dominant structure, let me go somewhere where there's some freedom and make the world communal and as we envision it. So, of course, because all these patterns are structured in us, we bring the problems with us usually. But you can, has anybody ever visited a monastery, a working monastery, like gone for a retreat there or anything? No, I have, and it's kind of lovely, like there was this place in Vermont I used to go when I was in school, and it was monks, and they did things like woodworking and beekeeping and gardening, and you could get up with them in the morning at 4:00, and they would do their matins or their chants in the morning. It was total silence and just these beautiful voices. It was kind of like feeling a little like heaven on earth, and that was the vision of the Essene. You want a place where, can't we just make a place for just God's Spirit to rule? Isn't that what we're called to do? Yeah, right? So you can understand the Essenes as well. It's like, yeah, I can connect with that impulse. But then Jesus was really none of those. And it was the Sadducees, of course, at the crucifixion, who were most against Jesus because he advocated for the oppressed and the poor and women and etc. So, all right. So at the time, you all know that there were many rabbis, there were many teachers, and Jesus was of Nazareth, which was, you imagine like Washington, D.C., and how there are neighborhoods, right? So Nazareth was an area within the Roman Empire where it was dominated by Jews, and they were pretty poor. They weren't as well resourced as other areas of the country. And so there wasn't as many as like fertile land and stuff like that. But in the Jewish tradition, there's this really important emphasis put on education and learning the Torah for the males, anyway. So Jesus would have studied, and he learned Hebrew and Aramaic, right? So Hebrew was the language of reading the sacred texts. Aramaic is the language of discussing them. Okay? So he's around all these learned people. He's a carpenter, which from our standards we say, oh, he's a blue-collar worker, that's lower on the totem pole. But in fact, at that time, most people were agricultural. To have a skill was actually kind of, it was a good thing. It was more education and formation. So he had a trade, so he had more ways of making his way. So when we say born in a manger, contrast, I don't know if any of you are, like, if you think about plumbers and electricians and people with skills, they're working people, but I have 2 master's degrees, and people with trades from a vocational school make probably 3 times what I do. You know what I mean? Yeah. So in our culture, a tradesperson also still has a level of sophistication that they might not dress in shirts and ties, right? In terms of their learning and intelligence and that sort of thing. So there's Jesus in that kind of realm. So at the time, people, as we do to each other, we're always trying to, where are you coming from and what box do you fit in, right? We're always kind of sizing each other up. And at the time, people were doing that to Jesus. They're always like, who are you? Who do you think you are, right? And at the time that Jesus was doing his ministry, there was another Jew named Hillel. How many of you have ever heard of a Hillel house at like a university, or you've heard of a, so you know how we have like the University Center, the Guerreri Center. So there are a lot of college campuses have a Hillel house, which is a place for Jewish students to gather, named after this guy who was a contemporary of Jesus's. And both of them shared a similar message, which was less emphasis on the law and more emphasis on love and compassion, as you know. That's why we're here, because of that message, right? The other thing that Jesus was, as you know, was a healer. He wasn't just a prophet. He wasn't just a rabbi. He also was a healer. He was those things and a healer. So it was hard to figure out who, he was all of those things. So fast forward. So those are kind of going back to our roots. How does that apply to contemporary church life today? Is that there are three basic ways that believers relate to all this history, which is one is a literalist. That's very Bible-based, and people who are literalists say, we're all Bible-based because all this is from the Bible. But there are people who say, I don't want to hear anything that you have to say. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to interpret the Bible, and that's what's true, right? And literalists say that Jesus, when he was alive, knew he was God. Okay? Rationalists, we had the expansion of people's literacy. We had universities developed, and we began reading the Bible. The Bible wasn't kept from us, right? And then we also, whole worlds of scholarship opened up about this whole Christian history and who is Jesus and how do all these history and archaeology and all this stuff fit together. And rationalists today will say, well, we know that historians who have a methodology have proven that Jesus was a historical real person. He lived here. There's evidence in the archaeological record that he was here. So it's hard to argue that Jesus, you have to say Jesus existed. Now, who he is a matter of faith and conversation, right? Rationalists say, okay, Jesus did exist. I accept that. He was a phenomenal person, just like Gandhi was phenomenal, and just like MLK. Well, MLK was phenomenal because he studied Jesus. But they say he was very, prophetic, and he moved people, and he was all about transformation, but he wasn't God. The God part was laid on by people's desire to believe in mythology, because the Jesus and Jewish stuff was happening in the context of this ancient mythological way of thinking where there are spirits and many gods right? So they say that our desire to stay connected with that false belief in false gods, we said, okay, we'll lay the supernatural dimensions of mythology onto this historical person, Jesus, and now a person was also God, and that helps relieve our anxiety about letting go of God. But it's not true, the rationalists would say, right? He really wasn't God, right? So we here gathered are neither of those. We come from a way of thinking that would be regarded as centrist, which means that we believe, like when you put yourself into the text, the way you put yourself into darkness through your imagination, you can put yourself into the time of Jesus in your imagination and imagine yourself being in the crowds that he was talking to. And what would that have been like? You would have been like, it depends on who you are, but if you're picking up the holiness of him, you're going like, my God, who is this? Like, and the Jews are all expecting a Messiah, right? So but you also don't want to believe in something false. So you're putting him through your filter, like, are you the Messiah? Are you not, So, centrists try to put themselves in the human world of Jesus, that Jesus was fully human, as you prayed, Joy, that he knows what it is like to shed a tear at the death of a beloved. Zeus didn't know that. Right. Okay? So it's a very intimate, and Jesus is telling them the God that made you is that kind of God, which is like, oh my God, it's so healing to hear that, right? So, but if you were in the day with Jesus, the courage it took to believe that, to have faith in that, in him, could have gotten you killed to make that statement, right? So you can imagine the anxiety around trying to sort out, could it be him? Is it not him? And then if you say it's absolutely not, you can see why people would make that. I'm not going down a false path. I'm aligned with the true God, right? And there's God saying, it's me, it's me. And, so how we can look at the person of Jesus as divine is solidified by the resurrection experience of him on the road to Emmaus. We benefit from the testimony of people who encountered the resurrected Jesus, and that is why we call him Christ, right? That the ones who followed him put their faith in him, and at the foot of the cross, he's hanging there. You're like in despair, right? Like, can you imagine the darkness they were in at that moment? But then to have that faith verified by him showing up in some kind of body, because they saw him as a body, but he wasn't exactly recognizable, right? So it was a different kind of body, which is still a little mysterious. But it is from that, when you really ponder, my God, what if he walked in here today and said, I'm just popping in again to let you know it's true. It's true. And it's so thoroughly reassuring, that when we talk about the peace of God, you get it from that experience. We can only get it through that experience, really. So we believe it is through the lens of the resurrected Jesus that we say, I'm sure that he was, the whole time, everything that he was saying is true. Then when we enter the scriptures and the testimonies of the parables that he shared, etc., we can study it with confidence that this is the word of God, and it helps us. It helps us to live. So how is all of that related to the passage that I chose for today? Because the birth, which is what we're, in Advent, we celebrate the coming into the world of that Holy Spirit, the Spirit that was in Jesus and that is in us. And that's why the commercialization of it is so tragic, because people are starving for the experience of that peace and that understanding that we are redeemed in this way and we are loved already in this way. At the time that Jesus was saying that, in the book of John, when he made that statement, when Jesus made that statement, it was during the time of his persecution. And he's like almost desperately trying to say, like, don't you see, like, this is it, and I am it. Here it is, and it's here for you. And where we have a struggle, like, you want to get into conflicts about Catholicism and Protestantism. I was formed as a Catholic. It is part of my identity, okay? I struggle, and it's Roman Catholicism. And the values of the Roman system are definitely merged with the church experience or whatever. So you want to talk about having to dance with life and its challenges, and but I really feel that even within God's spirit and truth is always available to us no matter what. And I don't claim to be a recovering Catholic or any of that. I claim to be a child of God, and I trust that God has me. So one of the criticisms that Jesus makes of the Pharisees, who are part of the agency that's testing him during those chapters in John, is you say that Moses is your father. Moses brought you the law, and yet you are trying to kill me. Now, most people don't. They're like, what? But what is the first commandment? I mean, right. You shall have no God other than right. But that's right. So, but it's the second, right? Thou shalt not kill.
You shall not make a graven image.
The third. So the criticism is the very thing you are persecuting me for, which is not abiding by the law. In my persecution and in your killing of me, you're violating the thing you're killing me for. Do you see how crazy that is? And how often do we do that stuff? So Jesus claims to be the light of the world, and you here obviously believe that, have faith in that, and have had personal experience of the transformative power of embracing that. So what I want to put a little bit of focus on today is when one of the most radical things that Jesus did in his ministry, the prophets would always say, "The Lord says," and then they would deliver the prophecy. When Jesus spoke, he said, "And I say to you." And you can imagine going, "Oh my God," right? If you were hip to it, gives me chills thinking about having experienced that you had, when you hear the prophets, people were probably like sponges, gimme, gimme, gimme. But then Jesus standing in front of, and all that time, and now it's this intimate thing. "And I say to you," I'm standing right in front of you, and I'm saying to you. And what that must have done to the mind and hearts of people who heard. Now, Jesus leaves us and says, "You will do greater things than I, because the same Spirit that is in me is in you." Remember that? Mm-hmm. So all this crazy mess that we are experiencing, all the sorrow in this community, all the despair that are leading people to suicide and heroin, the financial difficulties that we face as people, the illnesses. Remember that you are endowed with that very same Spirit and authority. And it's not a dominating authority. It's a confident authority to bring that love and mercy and presence to people. And I invite you to kind of heighten your senses and give them to God this season. Give God your eyes and your ears. And when you're going out shopping or whatever, or when you're having dinner and you see someone sitting alone, have the confidence to be a little spark of the light of that Spirit to someone. And if you see someone eating alone or something, "Are you enjoying your dinner?" Something just kind, spread it, give it, build people up with it. If someone is suffering, don't back away and like, oh my God, like, people say to me all the time, I don't know how you do the work you do. You're like specially anointed. I'm like, no, I'm not specially anointed. I don't think. I think what it is that I know what it's like to suffer. And I know what it's like to be loved. And I'm going to love this person in their darkest hour because I'm called to. And a lot of times it doesn't mean that I know the answer or what to do. I simply make the decision to show up and stay present, which really, a lot of people I work with are of advanced years, 80s, and there's one guy who's 90. And some people say, I don't know what my life is for. My children are grown. My husband is dead. I don't work anymore. Why am I still here? I don't even know what my life is for. And, how many times have you had someone die and you just wish, God, you just remember, if they were even just sitting in their recliner reading the newspaper again, or if I could just see somebody, making breakfast in the kitchen, just feeling their presence was a tremendous gift. And I want you to remember that you have that presence and you are a tremendous gift. And sometimes we have, in our own despair, we need to give that gift that God puts in us to ourselves and let ourselves receive it. Right? You got it? Yes. So that is, I want to thank you for receiving me today, and I thank you all for being here, that we can commune together. It's everything to me. So thank you.